on and welcome back to the RFL podcast. Well, it's been a little while. We talked a little bit partway through the season. We have had a trade deadline come and go now. And of course, we're going to be talking through some of those transactions today, trying to break down some of the key trades at the deadline before we come back with a future episode to talk a little bit about the playoff picture and what that looks like. But of course, to join me on this journey, talking about the trade deadline, is Wobbegong. Wobbegong, welcome back to the podcast. Do you think it was a busy trade deadline this time? I mean, there's a few deals we can talk about, but I wouldn't say it was massively hectic.
I think it was busy, that's true, but mainly centered around a couple of teams that were on the selling end, or three teams. And some teams that made some good moves, but not too many teams involved. I think it was a normal trade deadline, maybe a little bit busier compared to last year, if I remember correctly. But a few really big names that got traded.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll try and break some of that down for the audience today. But of course, we always reach out to the GMs across the RFL for their views, opinions, and thoughts in terms of what we cover on this episode or on future episodes, what we cover in terms of teams, how they think their franchises are doing, or anything else they want us to consider. And of course, it's worth us mentioning that we had the Kansas Chiefs GM reach out to us and give us a bit of text in terms of his trade deadline transactions as well as where the team is going. And a massive thank you to him for doing that. And thank you to everyone else who has done this in the future and in the past. And we very much enjoy it. It really helps us try and shape the episodes itself. But Wobbegong, do you want to take us through what the Kansas Chiefs said about their deadline day?
Yeah, sure. So the Chiefs are clearly in a rebuilding phase. The team's lone victory came against the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 5, and we're still not sure how that happened. Now the Chiefs have found themselves sitting at the bottom of the NFL with a dismal 1-10 record. The team's struggles have been hard to watch with a lack of consistency on both offense and defense. However, amid this misery, there may be a glimmer of hope that could make the agony of the season worth enduring. A top overall pick seems to be on the horizon. In an attempt to build for the future, the Chiefs made a few moves at the trade deadline. Notably, the Chiefs acquired an additional first-round pick for the 1884 NFL draft from the New York Giants in a pick swap that saw the Chiefs sending 1985 second-rounder to New York. Basically, the goal was to acquire future draft capital at the deadline. While it's a bitter pill to swallow for the Chiefs fans for this season, there is now the possibility that the franchise could shore up key positions such as quarterback, where the Chiefs have struggled to find stability, and on defense, where they've been porous throughout the season. With two first-rounders, there's some flexibility in how to move forward, and the Chiefs are in for a fun offseason ahead. What do you think of the Chiefs move?
Yeah, I mean, we covered the Chiefs quite a lot during the draft in the off-season because obviously GM change, and we kind of mentioned that the team was in a difficult position really for anyone to come in. So I'm not surprised that the deadline, given where they are, which is bottom of the RFL, they decided to kind of cash in some of their assets that they probably have that are probably not going to be ready for their next phase of the franchise to kind of bring in an additional set of first-round picks and additional picks from the Mero trade. My initial reaction, Wobbegong, I think, is the Giants deal, I think, is a solid one for them. They're going to just land themselves another first-round pick and sort of build up talent that way. The Mero one was interesting. I mean, I quite like Mero as a player, so I felt that possibly could have eked out a little bit more for him. But again, I can see why the Chiefs are moving away from keeping players on their roster that probably aren't going to be there for the longevity of the franchise change. In exchange for some draft capital in what is going to probably be a good 1985 draft, and an 84 first round pick is certainly going to help them move on their way. But what were your thoughts?
Yeah, when we look at the trade with the Giants, it's not only the first round pick for a second round pick in the future. The Chiefs also sent wide receiver Stanley Morgan, 84 overall, 28 years old, so a great addition for the Giants. We have to remember they're fighting for the title in the NFC East, so getting good wide receiver could help them. And the Giants sent back Steve Odom, also a wide receiver, but a little bit worse, a little bit older. So they got the better wide receiver, but of course paid a first round pick and got a second round pick back. I think it makes sense for the Chiefs to don't look at the roster this year, but rather acquiring talent, and first round picks are especially valuable in this league. So I think that's a win-win move for both teams. Giants get better this year and focus on their fight in the NFC East, whereas the Kansas City Chiefs, trying to get better draft capital and getting a first round pick out of that is especially good. And you also mentioned the second trade with the Minnesota Vikings, where they sent Jeff Merrow. He's an edge rusher, also already 30 years old. Again, the Vikings are in the win now window, one of the best teams in the NFC, so they could use a star edge rusher who's definitely faster than the edge rusher they sent back in Terry Beason to the Chiefs. So again, the Chiefs fill a position of need or trade an edge rusher and get an edge rusher back. He's a little bit younger, a little bit worse, but also getting a third round pick and a sixth round pick. So 2 lottery tickets for the Chiefs in the 85 draft, where they just traded away a second rounder. So they have good draft ammunition for the next few years. As Jackson wrote, to maybe acquire a quarterback, getting better on defense and offense, and getting picks. I think that's a good strategy for the Chiefs to finally be a more stable team than they've been in the past.
Yeah, I mean, look, thank you very much for Jackson for sending over the text and his views on the Chiefs. And I think we're all going to be interested to see how they do sort of in the off season and next season, see whether there's an upward progression. But he was always going to be in a tough situation with this Chiefs team. It was always going to be at the bottom, probably the bottom 3 in terms of roster talent and capital available. So it's a real tough job. So I'm sure when we see that Chiefs roster climbing up and the franchise kind of moving forward, he's going to get all the accolades that come his way for doing something, because it is a very difficult challenge to do that in the RFL, given with, as you mentioned, sort of top heavy sort of talent that's available, the smaller roster sizes. It makes it a little bit more of a challenge for anyone coming in. But that is the Kansas Chiefs and their trade deadline transactions. But of course there were other deals that were done. Let's swing our way over to look at the transactions tab here and just move ourselves down the week sort of 9 and 10 stuff. See if I can find the first one, which I believe is probably worth us talking a little bit about. One that wasn't necessarily done on the trade deadline, but it was a bit of a drastic move in terms of talent and what was available, and big change in terms of the RFL landscape, which was the Houston Oilers sent Norm Snead, Will Grant, and a first round pick and a 4th round pick to the Chargers for Dan Foots. So we know obviously the Chargers had a new GM change coming in. We all kind of already knew that Foots was going to be on his way out, given that the team had picked up, he's picked up some really, picked up Sims, and having 2 elite quarterbacks is not going to help anyone really in the long run. So they kind of cashed in that. But the big change is obviously the Houston Oilers, 8-3 at the minute, but we're on a bit of a tear given that they had some quarterback challenges, and picking up an elite quarterback in Foots is certainly going to help them. But I know it wasn't quite done at the deadline, Wobbegong, but I think we need to talk about that one given the player involved and the possible change on the landscape in the RFL.
Yeah, for sure. So the Houston Oilers trying to get ahead in the AFC Central, which is currently led by the Cincinnati Bengals with a 9-2 record. Houston Oilers just behind with an 8-3 record, but also Cleveland is at 6-5. The Steelers, after winning 4 games in a row, are back to a winning record of 6-5. So a tough division, and the Houston Oilers get a quarterback in Dan Foots, who hopefully will lead them for a few years. I really like his style because 100 arm is definitely really, really good, especially in a league where there's the chance to also throw long passes and get some quarterbacks in with great arms. That's my strategy as well if you look at the Buffalo Bills. So I really like Dan Foots as a player. 32 years old, so still in a good age for a quarterback, but especially also a really good move for the Chargers. They did not need two good quarterbacks, and for them getting back a first-round pick, which will be very low first-round pick, so rather in the 20s, but still getting first-round talent is definitely also key for the Chargers to get better. They get back, of course, Norm Snead. I do not expect him to play a key role for the Chargers, but definitely a good backup quarterback right now, and also center Will Grant. Maybe also not a cornerstone for the offensive line, but still help for their quarterback. So I think made sense for both teams. So great deal for the Oilers. Let's see if Dan Foots is really the missing piece to get the division title and make a deep playoff run.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Houston Oilers did not stop there in terms of their trade transactions towards the deadline. But I think before we talk about that next Houston Oilers deal, we need to talk about probably the bit of news that came out towards the trade deadline, which was the Seattle Seahawks basically were open for business in terms of trading. The team had kind of recognised that they were, I think, 4-5 or 4-6 at the time. Weren't necessarily going to be competing in a very, very competitive AFC this year, and decided that they were going to try and move a whole bunch of pieces, and a lot of the trade deadline transactions revolve around Seattle. So anyone who's watching is interested in Seattle, we'll probably round out towards the end what it means for Seattle in terms of all of their moves, because there was quite a few there. But it brings us back to the Houston Oilers deal they completed, which was essentially they sent Scott Laidlaw, Lyle Blackwood, a first-round pick in 1985, a second-round pick in 1985, to basically acquire Don Cherry, who is certainly a very, very elite talent. And I'm sure that they're going to be looking forward to bringing him in at free safety, which is a massive upgrade for them. But, your thoughts in terms of the Oilers essentially moved a couple of first-round picks here to bring in two elite talents. One obviously young in terms of 24, Don Cherry, but giving away a lot of draft capital to bring those two guys in. Do you think that's going to get the Oilers over the hump in terms of their playoff and championship contending capability this year and next year?
I really love Don Cherry as a player, and fun story about this. I saw that the Seahawks posted that they are just selling the whole team. But after seeing this in retrospective, they posted it after the Oilers deal. So maybe they had a deal in place earlier, just confirmed it, and then the Seahawks decided to, I could also get rid of other players, because I only saw the message of the Seahawks fire sale. And the first thing I did was going through the roster, looking at great players, and Don Cherry was the first player I saw. And in an attempt to be the first one, I immediately wrote him and said, first round pick, second round pick for Don Cherry. And he just said, I already traded him. And then I recognized, okay, the Oilers were way before me, and did also offer, in addition to the first and second round pick, two players that could help the Seahawks. Of course, they're on the older side, both in Laidlaw and Blackwood, but still fills an immediate need after trading Cherry, and getting a first rounder and a second rounder for free safety is really good. And I think that's a move that could help win now teams. I would not trade for a free safety as a rebuilding team or a team that's not quite there, but as a team that's ready to compete, ready for a Super Bowl, getting a young player in Cherry, I think that's a good move. As the Seahawks, I understand why they just want to get draft capital, tearing everything down, maybe getting players in more prime positions into the roster. So I can understand the move. Trading a young superstar on defense, of course, could hurt them in the short term. But when we look at the draft picks now, the Seattle Seahawks, we're going to talk about the other trades, but in the next year's draft, they will have 3 first rounders, and in the year after that, already 2 first rounders and 4 second rounders. So there is a lot of draft ammunition for them to get a younger roster starting from zero, and hopefully for them getting better and being able to compete for the division. And I think it's also interesting. They've been 4-3 and now lost 4 games in a row, now 4-7, but they already knew their roster so that they might not compete and need more draft picks in the future to not be in the middle of the league all the time, but rather being bad for 1 or 2 years and then being really, really good. Interesting strategy, and I think, some good moves for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the Oilers, they're going to come away from the trade deadline very, very happy with what they managed to pick up in Foots and in Cherry. I think there's no denying that they've added some really good quality to that roster. Means they're going to probably continue to be up the top end of the AFC this year and probably next year. So probably worth getting rid of the draft capital for that. And really interesting in terms of your Cherry's situation. I guess I do wonder if Seattle maybe did that trade and actually thought, well, if we're giving away, a young, really, really talented free safety and sort of defensive player, and we're 4-3, maybe now's the time we just try and see what we can get for the rest of the roster. And I really admire the fact that GMs and teams don't want to stay in the middle of the pack. That makes it means it's very, very competitive, and I think as you said, it's a very, very brave strategy to do, because the easy thing for any GM to do is just to go, we'll just continue with the roster, we'll carry on in the middle, we might make a playoff every couple of years, but we'll always be competitive. But the fact that Seattle are going down the full route of bottom to top is really interesting, and we'll sort of see that as some of the other trades and transactions at the deadline kind of play out as we talk about them. Speaking of one of those, the next one that they kind of completed was with the San Diego Chargers. So they San Diego Chargers sent Clark Gaines a first round pick in '84, which is the one they acquired from Dan Foote. A '84 New Orleans Saints second round pick for Roger Craig. So the Chargers obviously sensing that they've needed to cash in quite quickly to kind of bring in a real, really, really good quality running back for them. What's your thoughts in terms of the deal there?
So essentially, they traded away Dan Foots for Roger Craig. If you combine those picks, or at least paid a little bit more, I think Craig is a very talented running back. I remember when we talked about the draft that this was one pick where you've been surprised that he already went at 12. Good running back for sure, but given the other talent that was still on the board, you at least have been surprised that the Seahawks picked Craig. Now, after half a season, he's already gone, sent to the Chargers. I mean, big price to pay for a rookie running back. He has been really good this year so far, or decent enough with an average of 4.2 and already 6 touchdowns. Already played or was planning to play a bigger role in the receiving game. So maybe that's something that the Chargers could start. He has 2 drops so far on 5 targets. So it's maybe something where Roger Craig can get better. For me personally, it's a little bit more than I would have paid for Roger Craig. I think he's a good running back. But yeah, since the Chargers are maybe a team that needs a few more building pieces, maybe adding a player in the first round and in the second round instead of Craig might have been the better move. But I appreciate the fact that they're trying to get better and younger. They have a young running back, which is arguably one of the more important positions in our league. He should be really, really good for the next few years. So definitely not a big overpay or anything. Seahawks get back draft ammunition, as already said, and older running back. So maybe they also have the chance to invest that in other positions, maybe going with a veteran at running back in free agency next year. So it will be interesting since they seem to prioritize running back very highly. They drafted him 12 overall. What the new strategy is with the pick and addressing the running back position.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the Chargers' perspective, I wonder if they'd have held the pick, whether it would have actually brought in something else a bit more valuable in the off-season. Maybe this was, my initial thought was it was probably a bit of a rush transaction, given the urgency for Seattle to kind of move pieces. I think benefit that the Chargers have on their side is that he's only 23. He's locked down for 4 years, and he is a very good running back. He's not going to suddenly overnight turn into a declining running back. He's got all of those years he's contracted. He's going to be a very good running back. So I think we'll have to revisit at the end of the contract and see, did they get enough value out of him from there, and what could they have possibly picked up with that first round pick will be the comparison that we'll draw from that, I think. I'm interested to see how the Chargers do going forward. We've kind of mentioned that they are, they're sort of in the hunt for probably being a team that could make a quick jump up into being competitive. I don't think it's going to be this year though. I think it's more likely next year. But they are starting to restructure the roster a little bit. You can see that with some of the transactions they've done. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on the Chargers, see what they do in the offseason to build around that talent that they've acquired there. Let's continue our moving on with the Seattle Seahawks, who are the main transaction deadline franchise here. They then completed a further transaction with the Baltimore Colts. The Colts sent Wilbur Jackson, Ken Magnuram, Ken Woodward, and a 85 second round pick for Steve Largent. I can also give you my thoughts on that Wobbegong, but I'm interested in your thoughts on that one before I give you my first-hand view from the Colts perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering when Steve Largent will be traded. As soon as he wrote fire sale, I knew that this is a player that teams will go for. He was not an option for me, mainly because of the salary cap. I had no chance at all to take on a 3-year contract of $180,000, which is a good deal, of course, but I just don't have the salary cap. 29 years old, so he should at least play a few more seasons at an elite level. And when you look at him compared to the league, maybe in terms of stat, not the best player. He had 3 seasons over 1,000 yards, the rest over 900 with one exception. So it's really good. Maybe not that elite when you look at his ratings. Also in terms of touchdown, 3 seasons with double-digit touchdowns, which is awesome, of course. Few drops, but really good averages. He's a really, really good receiver and the fastest one in the league. He has 91 speed, 90 hand, 89 agility, and although he might decline in the next 2 or 3 years, he's definitely an elite player and should be one of the best wide receivers for at least 2 or 3 years. So I was honestly a little bit surprised that the Seahawks did not get a first rounder. Maybe other teams would have paid that, not sure. Maybe it's also the right pick to pay a second rounder in addition to other players. As the Seattle Seahawks, I would have asked for a first rounder. Maybe they did, so maybe you have more insights as the Baltimore Colts for sure. But again, the Seahawks get a running back to fill an immediate need in Wilbur Jackson, also adding a wide receiver again to fill an immediate need after trading Steve Largent. And when we look at Marjoram, he's a young wide receiver, so getting younger for the Seahawks is key. 79 agility, 76 speed, 77 hands, so he's decent. Has been a third-round pick a couple of years ago, so maybe the Seahawks could use him a little bit more and get a little bit more production out of him. And also cornerback Ken Woodard. He's maybe also not a centerpiece, but again, young player who could maybe play a rotational role for the Seahawks. So 3 players, a second-round pick. As the Seahawks, again, I would have maybe hoped for a first-round pick for the best wide receiver in the league, but definitely on the Baltimore Colts side, a good deal to get the offense going and investing not only in this season, but also giving John Elway a weapon for at least 2 or 3 more years.
Yeah, I mean, I think from Colts' perspective, Steve Largent, we needed another offensive weapon for Elway, basically. That was obvious from the first set of games. Surprisingly, when we played Seattle, actually, it was evident. So, yeah, happy to pick him up. I think it's a fair analysis of him, Wobbegong, which is, ratings-wise, he looks very good, but he seems a bit erratic in terms of his performances. Whether that is system previously or not, I haven't quite got to that decision yet, really, given the limited number of games he's played for us so far. But the view really is that it was taking your advice from the very first episode we did, which was if you're going to have a talented quarterback, then make sure you have at least 2 or 3 actual decent options for him to in receiving, because otherwise it makes it much harder, much more easier for a team to defend, and this will hopefully make it harder for teams to defend us on the passing game, because we've got him plus Pittman, who are sort of the 2 sort of good wide receivers that we have, tied with the likes of Douglas and Johns, who are, I think, solid in their own right in certain situations. So that was the thought process behind it, really. In terms of the second round pick, I can't remember whether we discussed the first or not, to be honest with you. It was a little while ago now. But as soon as that post went up regarding Seattle and moving pieces and things, he was the first name on my list to try and get, given that we had the cap space we could use to kind of get it done. The other thing that's worth mentioning is obviously Seattle are going to have a bunch of cap space going forward with that. They basically cleared it. All the guys that have moved in a lot of these transactions are 1-year deals, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But obviously Seattle did not just finish there. They continued their move along, which was essentially with the Vikings moving Ron Crosby for a Vikings a 4th round pick from Miami for next year, 5th round from Washington, and a 6th round plus Steve Towle. Moving Ron Crosby, I guess, is an interesting one. Very talented linebacker in his own right. Obviously, he's in the right sort of time zone, sort of age-wise, for the likes of the Vikings, really. Given that he is 28 years old, he's pretty much decent at everything at linebacker position. So no surprise that the Vikings are also sniffing around to try and pick up some talent to help them with their title charge this year. Value-wise, Wobbegong, do you think that was probably the right sort of balance in terms of a 4th, 5th and 6th and Steve Towle, or do you think that they could have maybe got a little bit more from Ron Crosby?
I think a 4th, 5th and 6th round pick might be a little bit more valuable than just the 3rd rounder, since you have 3 lottery tickets for getting a sleeper in the late rounds. Not sure how everyone values that, but 3 lottery tickets is, of course, better than only 1. I think the talent over the 3 rounds are mainly that you get backup players, except you have one of these draft sleepers. So he gets a few picks back. I like the move again for the Vikings. So 2nd trade where they get a good defensive player, Ron Crosby, 82 overall, 20 years old, on a 1-year contract. So I'm not sure if they already extended him, but definitely plan to extend him. He had a good amount of sacks and especially forced fumbles over the last few years. Also impressive amount of tackles, so he could really be a cornerstone for the Vikings. And they sent an older player back to the Seahawks, and that's one really interesting player. Maybe worth mentioning, Steve Towle, Seattle Seahawks, now has been on the Miami Dolphins before this season, and he had 17-sack season as a linebacker, which is really good. Other than that, not been a starter for the Dolphins, so maybe he could also be one of the pieces for the Seahawks if they extend him for 1 or 2 years to build around on the defense and get a good, maybe younger team around him. I would have maybe asked for a little bit more, but definitely a deal without any big names, big draft picks. I think a good move for the Vikings to get a little bit better, sending a few picks for the Seahawks, and maybe they get lucky and get a draft sleeper in one of the later rounds.
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve Towle would be an interesting one if they extend him for a year. If they could get him back up to anywhere near that level of performance from several years ago, you might get another pick for him. Who knows? Interesting to see where they do that, to be honest with you. I think reality being is they might just dump him in the off-season and move on. But getting picks from Seattle's perspective, and we'll talk about that after one more trade that they did, is adding back to that rebuilding category that they're kind of looking to get themselves back into, really. There was obviously one further trade that they looked at and completed, and that was with Green Bay. So they sent Jeff Bryant, Doug Marsh for another 84 first rounder, but this one was a Dallas Cowboys one. an 85 second rounder from Green Bay, and Jim Merlo, the linebacker. Your thoughts and reflections on that for Green Bay?
I think if I need to pick a winner there, maybe it's Green Bay. Looking at trading a first and second round pick, of course, seems a lot, but the first round pick is from Dallas, which will be most likely in the 20s, and the Packers get better this year. If I remember correctly, they don't have their own first round pick in terms of trading with the Dallas Cowboys. I don't remember it exactly, but they have no reason in losing right now. They need to get better. And they did not acquire any old player or anything like that. Two young players. First, looking at what they sent in addition to the first and second rounder, Jim Merlo, a 32-year-old linebacker, 72 overall. So nothing groundbreaking that the Seahawks get, but they sent maybe again two young cornerstones. And of course, the Seahawks traded a lot, and that's what I said earlier. They have a lot of picks now, but they also traded mainly their younger players. And looking at Jeff Bryant, edge rusher, 87 overall, 23 years old. 1 year ago, he has been the 4th overall pick in the draft. And now the Packers get him for a first and second rounder, in addition to a tight end, and it's a late first rounder. So a great deal for them. I think there's a lot of production that the Green Bay Packers can get out of him. Rookie season, Jeff Bryant with 8 sacks, this season already at 6 sacks, and also 2 forced fumbles. He will be better in the future, so still a player who get better every year, looks definitely decent enough. And tight end is a position where we do not have many elite players in the league. I would not say that Doug Marsh is elite, but he is a young tight end, 25 years old, former third-round pick, 77 overall with decent agility, speed, and hands. He did not play a big role in the past for the Browns or for the Denver Broncos. He has been on the Seahawks this season and now traded to the Green Bay Packers. And I think this is definitely a player where you can get a little bit more production out of him if you use him correctly. Definitely looks decent enough. A new weapon for the Packers, both on offense and then also on the D-line. I like this move by the Packers.
Yeah, I like the move for the Packers. I did try and get Jeff Bryant. Unfortunately, I'm limited in my first round picks because I'd already thrown one away for this year coming, so I didn't necessarily want to give up a further one for him. Plus some other things I think that Seattle were after from me for him in the end. But yeah, I really like it for Green Bay. I think two very good young players they got. Obviously, they had to give out more draft assets for it, but reality being that Cowboys first round pick, even in 2 years' time, is probably going to be relatively low in number. So I think it's going to massively help Green Bay going forward, getting two decent pieces on both sides of the ball. I think just it's interesting that as you mentioned, Jeff Bryant was the number 4 pick just a season ago, in 2 drafts ago now, and he's already been moved. So interesting that Seattle didn't necessarily just move all of their older pieces; they did move some of their younger pieces as well, which probably indicates to me, I think, from an outsider looking in, that he was not happy with how the team and the roster was constructed in its entirety. So it is a full tear-down rebuild from scratch rather than get rid of the older players, drop down a little bit, let the younger players develop, add further younger players on top, and then hopefully that propels them to the top. I think it is a full tear-down that they're looking to do there. But that is the last Seattle deal that is completed. So that brings us to probably rounding out the whole Seattle situation now, which is I'm just going to run through for the audience a very quick snapshot of what they essentially acquired. So we're looking at sort of 3 or so first round picks in sort of 85 and 84 additional. Plus, I think it's about, let's double check. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's 4 second round picks. I think off the top of my head, I can see there. Plus some 4th and 5th round picks over the next year. So the team does now have a bunch of draft capital going into this off-season and next off-season. I don't think there's anything that I would necessarily call as a standout. This pick is probably going to be a top-end pick at this moment in time. It's just it's too early to tell with the 85 stuff and the 84 things they acquired. It looks like those teams are going to be in playoff bound or near playoff bound this year. So, yeah, your thoughts, Wobbegong, on Seattle going forward? Bunch of draft picks and capital. I'm just going to check their salary situation whilst you're talking, but just to see roughly where they are in terms of that. They are probably looking at, there's a lot of the roster coming off this off-season as well. So they're probably going to have a good sizable amount of cap space. Yeah, it looks like 1.5 million at the moment going into it. So complete teardown, draft capital plus salary available to play with.
Yeah, very interesting for them. And when we look at their roster and sort by overall, and just a quick snapshot of all the players who are 80 overall or better, there's one player who's 24 years old, one player who's 29, and the rest is over 30 years old. So as said earlier, they traded their star younger players, but they still have a lot of older good players on the roster. So maybe that's the new strategy then for the offseason to also get rid of those. I think there are a few good players on there. Not sure of the contract details. Some of them are already under contract for next season. Some of them are not. But maybe there's the option to trade some of them to get more draft ammunition. I think they have to, otherwise the moves that they did were maybe not that effective. So trading their older, better players has to be a strategy for the offseason. And other than that, I'm really curious what they're doing. If they already tried to invest into a young quarterback and put him into a roster which is far from complete, or try to get the roster ready and maybe draft a quarterback next year or the year after that. Always also depends on the draft class that we're getting. So yeah, will be interesting to see what their off-season moves are, if they heavily invest in free agency, if they try to get younger players or just new players to fit into a new strategy. So yeah, no idea what they're doing. We'll be curious to follow them throughout the offseason.
Curious is the right word, I think, to follow them. I'm going to be really, really interested to see what Seattle do this offseason. I think they could be one of the big market makers, both in free agency, in the draft, as well as in the trade sphere. As you mentioned, there's still a bunch of talent on this team, probably at the older end. So if they are looking to go 84, 85, and then that 85, 86 season being back up there, some of these guys are going to probably move in 84 to kind of get the draft capital for 85 to have a real good go at it. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see. They've got a bunch of capital available in terms of salary, contract, and sort of space available to kind of make moves in the off season. So yeah, I'm going to be watching Seattle. I'm sure we'll come back to them in the off season, talk to them, because I'm sure they'll be doing a bunch of things activity wise to kind of move the team on. So going to be very, very interesting to kind of watch going forward. But that does bring us to our final final trade that was completed at the deadline. One team has already been involved in the trade, the other one actually hadn't. So apologies, we've left you to the end, but because Seattle had so many trades, we felt it was useful to try and cover off those all together as a cohesive unit, really. But it brings us to the Chicago Bears Giants deal. So the Chicago Bears sent out Bill Bryan and Steve Kenny for the Giants, sending back an 84 second, an 84 fourth, and an 85 fourth. Obviously, the Giants, as we mentioned in their other trade, are looking to be competing at the top end of their division. Currently 7-4, just a game behind Dallas at the moment as we talk. Looking to add additional sort of talent for this, and I imagine the Bears, given their standings at the moment, are probably looking at sort of a bit of a retool. So your reflections on that for the Giants and the Bears, Wobbegong?
Giants did their job in the division. The only team that made some moves in the NFC East. So they did all they could to get better, and getting two O-liners to help that is always a good move. Steve Kenny on guard looks really good, 84 overall, still 27 years old. So a few years left on the deal. And when you look at the Giants O-line, it looks really, really impressive now. They are at a 7-4 record, and looking at their O-line, They have now on tackle Steve Riley, 88 overall, and also JT Taylor, 83 overall on guard, in addition to Big Joe, who came from my Bills, 98 overall, still awesome player. And now also Kenny with 84 overall, and on center, getting a backup center to be ready in case John Hill, their starting center, gets injured, who's also already 33 years old. Think they have a really good strategy to protect their third-year player in Neil Lomax and being ready for the fight for the division title in the NFC East. So I like what the Giants did, paying a second rounder and a couple of fourth rounders. It's also a reasonable price for them. But also interesting story on the other end, the Chicago Bears 2-9 record. I think they did not have their own first round pick in last year's draft. But for the next few years, they will have their own first round picks and 3 second round picks in the next draft. And then in 85, already 3 first rounders. So they are a team looking to rebuild, and they try to trade even more players. So I think the interesting storyline here is maybe who did not get traded. He posted on deadline day a few players that could be moved. So a couple of them got traded, but the rest did not. And especially I was surprised about linebacker Clay Matthews. He said that he already got an offer of a first rounder, which was not enough for him. But if I remember correctly, he said that he was planning to trade him at the deadline, which did not happen. I really like Clay Matthews as a linebacker. And full transparency, I tried to trade for him also, not this year, but a few years back, also multiple times. Acquired another linebacker, which helped me win the Super Bowl, but Clay Matthews was definitely one of my targets. Really, really good player, 27 years old, one of the best linebackers in the league. So I was surprised that he did not get traded and no team paid for him. But yeah, it will be also interesting to see what the Chicago Bears will do in the offseason, since they are willing to trade some of their key pieces. And we're also trying to get in new talent over the next few drafts. So also interesting storyline next to the Seattle Seahawks if the Chicago Bears can use the offseason to get in more talent, especially when we look at their quarterback situation. Their best quarterback is 68 overall, which is not good. So getting better there is also a key task for them this offseason. So yeah, interesting to see what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's just watching on the video, the Clay Matthews photo that just came up is obviously Clay Matthews from the current NFL. I have no idea. Probably something to do with the coding, the name behind, and picking up the name itself. So obviously that's not the photo of the current Clay Matthews we're talking about here. If anyone's being confused that he's managed to go back in time there. But yeah, no, I mean I agree with you with the Bears. I think they were the interesting one because we had Seattle and Chicago, the two teams that were essentially cards on the table, both selling. Seattle made a bunch of transactions. Chicago looked like they were, but kind of didn't in the end. So again, off season is going to be interesting for them. I agree. The quarterback situation is not ideal for them. I'm pretty sure they are aware of that, and will hopefully be able to address that in the off season, whether that's free agency or the draft. But Chicago, they're out of the playoff picture. They're going to be rebuilding anyway for next season. On the Giants side, I do agree with you that offensive line is incredibly good now. And is that enough? I think. Do you think that's enough for the Giants to get over the line against Dallas now, being a game back at the moment, or do you think Dallas have still got enough to get themselves to the division title this year?
Honestly, no idea what this division is doing. We have the Cowboys with 8-3, and then 3 teams in the Giants, Cardinals, and Redskins with the 7-4 record. Eagles are at 5-6, but still theoretic chance to get into the playoffs. Honestly, right now, no prediction. I think it could be the Giants. That's what I said in the last podcast. But the Cowboys look really, really good. The Giants still have the chance to beat them. They will play each other in the final game of the year, so this will be a showdown. But the Cowboys also still have to play the Redskins, the Saints, the Cardinals, and the Giants. So really tough for them the last few games. The Giants will play against the Redskins, Raiders, Eagles, Seahawks, and Cowboys. So also tough schedule, maybe a little bit easier. So I think there's a chance that the Giants will steal the division title, although it will be tough. But in the last game, they won against the Cowboys. So that's a good start for them. Let's see if they can build on that and close out the season strong.
Yeah, the reason I threw that one back to you, Wobbegong, is because I have no idea. I honestly have no idea if the Giants are going to win the division. I have no idea if Dallas are. I have no idea if St. Louis or Washington are going to do that. But it tees us up quite nicely for the next episode. For everyone who's watching, we're going to probably come back next time and talk a little bit about the playoff picture. Who's in, who's out, who's on the borderline, which is, at this moment in time is probably going to be most of the NFC East are going to be on the borderline at this moment in time. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. Probably a couple of games time or so we'll have a better picture to kind of come back and give all of you that episode. But Wobbegong, it's been great to chat through some of the trade deadline stuff. Any final reflections before we close out this episode?
I think it's interesting also to think about the teams that did not make any moves. So many teams that are on the border to win now did not make any moves. But that's also mainly because most of the teams do not have that much salary cap left. Will be interesting if those teams who made big moves made the right moves, and it was correct for the other teams to not make any moves. It will be a very, very interesting rest of the season. As you said, next time we will talk about the playoff picture. And a few really interesting games left in the year. 11 games played, 5 still to go. Will be very interesting to see who gets the division titles. This will be a topic for next time.
Absolutely. We're nearly in that last quarter of the RFL season. And as everyone knows, last quarter is always the main one that matters. So we'll be back next time to break down what that looks like, how that's playing out. And, well, it's been great to have you back on Wobbegong. We'll talk playoffs next time.
See you next time.